is almost certain to win his vote of confidence in Parliament.
Like Spartans, it doesn't matter if we win this fight, but we have to give that fight.
One leading Greek commentator has urged the indignants to transcend blanket negativity and says if they want to get rid of inept politicians, they must take positive action and must not just make loud protests. Malcolm Brabant, BBC News, Southern Greece.
The New Democracy Opposition Party, thanks for joining us. How are you planning to vote today?
Well, let me make it absolutely clear that my party is supporting all the structural reforms that the government is putting forward, including the aggressive privatization. And we very much share the belief that we need to get to a primary surplus as quickly as possible in order to put our public finances into order. However, we feel that the recession that has hit the country, and which was also graphically displayed in your video, was much deeper than many people had anticipated, and that the recipe that the government has chosen to overtax an economy that is rapidly contracting is a recipe for disaster. So we have serious objections as to that part of the government strategy. But we are very much in favor of pushing the government to move much quicker on all the structural reforms. And one of the reasons why we are currently facing this crisis is because the government over the past 6 months did absolutely nothing in terms of privatizations.
So are you going to vote in favour of this confidence vote for the government or not?
No, we're not going to vote in favour of the confidence vote, but I do not anticipate the government having a problem obtaining the necessary parliamentary majority, and I do anticipate that Greece will have a government tomorrow.
But isn't that irresponsible of you to vote against when it jeopardises the whole rescue package, no matter how difficult it is for ordinary people to take, because the implications worldwide are huge?
Our job as a party of the opposition is to support the government when it's moving in the right direction and to point out the shortcomings of the current government. That is the role of any opposition in any democratic society, and that is exactly what we're doing. We are fully aware of the fact that the government's majority is not in risk, but by stating our opinion very clearly, we are saying that certain components of the government's strategy is in the wrong direction.
But do you think that by imposing less high tax levels, that then the cuts would have to be found somewhere else, wouldn't they? What is your exact alternative prescription?
We are saying two things, that there is further scope for reducing public spending. So we're very clear that the lower marginal tax rates that we're proposing can be counterbalanced by more aggressive revenue cuts. And we're also saying that in an economy that is rapidly contracting, there is a great possibility that by reducing or at least keeping marginal tax rates where they are, we could actually have a better revenue performance than we currently have. Because I need to point out to you that the government's current strategy for raising tax revenues has resulted in a €4 billion shortfall just in the first 5 months of the current budget. So clearly something is not working.
Can I just ask you very briefly, how much do you think is at stake here, not only for the Greece economy, but globally? Because it seems as though your country is really on the brink here of a huge problem.
Well, we're fully aware of the severity of the situation. And trust me, we're the first to be concerned with what will happen to the country. Because should Greece go bankrupt, obviously there will be ramifications for the rest of the world, but my country is going to be the first that will bear the brunt of this problem. So we're absolutely aware of the severity of the situation, and what we're trying to do is to be as constructive as possible in order to help the government, get out of this mess. And the way to do it is to be very aggressive and very clear on the structural reforms, which unfortunately the government has not done over the past 6 months, and that's why we are in this situation.
Okay.
As the government moved very quickly on the privatization program, we would not be in this situation now.
Okay, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, thank you very much indeed for joining us, MP from the New Democracy Opposition Party there. Well, Sally is here. I mean, part of the problem with the privatisation is that, for example, we've got these strikes. Who wants to invest in that? Where are the companies coming from?
Well, that's the thing. Investors will be looking for assets that produce a long-term steady stream of income. So traditionally, yes, it's things like power companies, it's things like railways. But of course, as you said, we've got these rolling blackouts already taking place because the main power company, the Public Power Corporation, supplies around 90% of the country's electricity. The workers are on strike, and of course investors will be looking at that and saying, well, I don't want to buy a whole heap of trouble as well. And there's been a huge amount of protest, for example, the selling off of the telecoms organisation, even though you do have interest obviously from companies in Germany that would be interested in telecoms as well. But again, as you say, the investors will be looking for steady returns, and you don't necessarily get that if you've got all this industrial unrest.
It's true that the resistance is also coming up the line, yes. Yesterday, for example, the union of the Public Power Corporation, which is a practical state monopoly at the moment and still 90% owned by the government, began rolling blackouts in neighborhoods of Athens. And this is a warning shot across the bows of the government saying, don't you think about cutting our pensions or privatizing us or breaking up the Public Power Corporation. This is the sort of social contract that the Socialist Party is now putting in danger with the unions and groups that have traditionally supported it through election periods, and including the last election period that brought George Papandreou to power in October of 2009. The Socialist Party is now saying, I have no choice but to break those contracts and to bring down entitlements to various social groups. And the unions that have the power to resist that will do so. So you will have rising political tensions.
John Sarapoulos joining us there in Athens with the latest. Many thanks. Andrew.
Now, Nina, Greece, of course, was where it all began. It was the first EU nation to actually be bailed out. That happened back in May of last year. The EU governments and the IMF agreed 110 billion euros, that's about $158 billion in emergency loans to bring it back from the brink of default. But it does seem like it's not going to be enough. Athens could be in line for another bailout of roughly the same amount, $170 billion. As we've said, however, that will depend on a number of things all falling into place. If Greece defaults, it'll spark fresh fears over other Eurozone nations that have received financial assistance. And we're talking mainly here about Ireland. In December of last year, Ireland received a bailout of 85 billion euros. That's about $113 billion. The Prime Minister at the time, Brian Cowen, was forced to step down soon after that bailout was awarded. And also, of course, we have Portugal. They were at first reluctant to accept help, eventually took 78 billion euros, about $110 billion. That was confirmed early last month. Nina.
Well, Andrew, for Greece to get that second bailout, its leaders must agree to raise 50 billion euros by 2015. They plan to do so by selling government-owned property, including all sorts of things from airports and real estate. But as Diana Magne reports, the hard part may be finding investors who are willing to take their chances by buying up pieces of a country that's, of course, already on the brink of financial ruin.
Greece is a country of timeless charm, but investing in its bloated and grossly inefficient public companies right now has very limited appeal. The state sector's heavily unionized, companies face tax hikes, and there's still the real possibility that Greece will default on its debts. The EU and IMF are demanding a massive privatization program of everything from ports to power to real estate. It's meant to raise as much as $70 billion, though that may be optimistic. And a fire sale would mean deeply discounted prices.
It's also going to be very hard to find serious buyers because a lot of people out there expect Greece to default and maybe even to go back to the drachma. So you have to take into account a devastating devaluation.
Two of the terminals at Athens' Piraeus port were leased to China's COSCO Pacific last year in a 35-year concession, which brought in $5 billion for the Greek state. Now the state's looking to sell another 23% of the port, despite opposition from the unions and numerous protests at the docks.
Generally, all this mess with privatization, with concession, with strikes, turned the ships to other ports. So we have less job than we used to have.
That's something the Greek people are getting used to. Unemployment's now at 16%. In the public sector, 10% of jobs have already gone. Another 20% is set to go. And there's still extra fat to cut, says former Finance Minister Stefanos Manos, who kicked off Greece's first round of privatizations 20 years ago.
For instance, in the railway in Greece, the average salary is 66,000 euros per annum, whereas the average salary in the private sector is about 22,000. And on top of that, employs twice as many people as it actually needs. So this kind of madness would have to be taken into account before you say, is anybody interested in buying the railway? I think whoever just considers that is completely out of his mind.
The new finance minister has promised to do what the IMF and the EU want: further austerity and full-scale privatization. But this is a socialist government which came to power on the back of the unions, and although it promised to push through its privatization program this time last year, it didn't make much headway, a sign perhaps of its reluctance to push through policies that are against everything that it stands for. Diana Magnay, CNN, Athens.
As the crisis in Greece continues, in the UK, the former Foreign Secretary Jack Straw is warning that the end of the Eurozone could be near. As MPs discussed a new bailout for Greece, Mr. Straw said that the euro was facing a slow death and that the Eurozone cannot last as it is. Andrew.
Nina, still ahead, planes for sale. We'll tell you who soared and whose was grounded.
And strikes in Greece came ahead of a critical vote Tuesday in the Greek parliament on more austerity measures. The European Union and the IMF are now demanding even more tax increases and more spending cuts in exchange for keeping the cash flowing in their $160 billion bailout of Greece. Financial markets are on edge. The socialist government in Athens has just a 5-vote majority in parliament. Failure to pass the austerity package could force Greece into default and rock the global financial system. On Sunday night, U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner participated in an emergency call with European finance ministers.
We have been encouraged by some of the steps that the Greek government has taken, and we encourage them to press on with the reforms necessary to get this situation to get it right.
Can be passed. Analysts say a default by Greece could spark financial turbulence around the world. European Commission President José Manuel Barroso says the EU is ready to support Greece, provided it follows through with the negotiated terms of its loan agreement. He says it is vital that Greece passes a crucial parliamentary vote of confidence in the new cabinet of Prime Minister George Papandreou. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has lent her support to Papandreou, saying new austerity measures should be approved by the Greek parliament for maintaining a stable euro.
It is crucial that the new Greek government receives the confidence of the parliament tonight, so that it can build the consensus the country needs for far-reaching economic reform. Next week is the moment of truth, where Greece needs to demonstrate that it is genuinely committed to the ambitious package of further fiscal measures and privatizations put forward by Prime Minister Papandreou's government and agreed with the European Union and the IMF. My message today is clear. If Athens acts, Europe will deliver.
We want a strong euro. We all depend on the fact that the euro remains a strong currency. That's why we are doing everything for the euro to remain stable. The competitiveness of Greece must be improved. Greece's debt needs to be tackled in the midterm. And therefore, the Greek parliament needs to pass necessary measures. We are ready for solidarity when the Greek measures have been adopted.
Mit 6,3 Milliarden ist die Bad Bank der Hypo Real Estate engagiert, die allerdings gehört zu 100% dem Staat. Und auch die Commerzbank mit knapp 3 Milliarden ist zu einem Viertel de facto im Besitz der deutschen Steuerzahler von wegen private Gläubiger. Aus deutscher Sicht spielt also der Beitrag privater Gläubiger zur Griechenlandrettung eine äußerst untergeordnete Rolle. Anders in Griechenland oder in Frankreich. Dort sind tatsächlich private Geschäftsbanken massiv im Geschäft und gefährdet. Dort finden wir sie noch, die privaten Gläubiger. Aber in Deutschland? Deutsche Versicherungen haben 2,8 Milliarden an die Griechen verliehen, Tendenz zügig fallend. Die Allianz-Tochter PIMCO, weltgrößter Staatsanleihehändler, meldet stolz, keine griechischen Staatsanleihen mehr zu besitzen. Griechenlands Schulden schon jetzt fast völlig in öffentlicher Hand. Was also soll die Debatte? Wenn wir noch lange warten, sind kaum noch Anleihen in der Hand privater Gläubiger, dann schultern die Steuerzahler allein die Rettung Griechenlands.